Good to be with you all. I'm glad some people stuck around. Not everybody followed John. I will never get into a popularity contest with him, although I know that has nothing to do with it, really. But it's good to be with you all. We're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. And I sort of went through I think it's Danny Kruger, the curve where you are really confident and then you get into it and you're like, oh, I know nothing. And maybe I'm a little bit above the negative axis now at this point, I guess. But when we look at this topic, the topic is largely about death. And that's not necessarily fun to think about. But if I go back just a few chapters, in chapter 7, the Bible says in verse 2 of chapter 7, better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So try to think about that, I guess. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, because this is the end of all of us. So it's good to think about these things to see how we should live our life. But I want to read the text in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. If you remember, Dylan spoke on this, I think it was Wednesday, the end of chapter 8, where he's talking about the preacher looks and he says, I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. He says, if you labor to discover it, if you work, if you don't sleep, and just spend all your time trying to figure out what it is God's doing, you will not be able to find it under the sun. So in chapter 9, he says, I considered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all. Verse 1, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. All things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath is he who fears an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living there is hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun, all your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and the labor which you perform under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. For man also does not know his time, like a fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of men are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. When you read those verses, it feels pretty fatalistic and almost sarcastic. Go live your life because you're going to die. That seems at first glance what you see here. But we're going to get into this and see how some of the wording, so the way it's translated, makes it feel that way. But it's not necessarily the message that he's trying to get across. But I do want to ask the question. So what do you do when the wisest man who ever lived tells you that your life probably isn't going to make sense? And because of that, you should live life to the fullest. That's really what he's saying here. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, we're going to look kind of at the reality of death. This is kind of my breakdown, I suppose. The madness of denial, if you think you're going to live forever, how that's almost madness to live that way. The sacredness of joy, and then the limits of wisdom. And we're going to talk about, at the very end, what does the Bible say about cheating death? Because, I'll just try to get you to wake up at the end so that we can maybe have a takeaway there. So just a few questions to think about as we get into this. I'll just read these. Do you expect God to explain himself before you can trust him? Now that doesn't mean do you expect there to be evidence of his existence or evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. That's not what I'm talking about. I do think you need to engage intellectually to understand these things. But in your life, do you expect God to explain himself before you can trust what he's doing in your life? How would you live if you truly believed that you're about to die? And what good gifts from God do you feel guilty enjoying? Are there ever moments like, I got to get back to work, I got to do this, I got to do that? Or can you actually enjoy your life? That's something I think sometimes we're not able to do at different points in our life. Are you fully engaged? And maybe a better question is, are you ever not engaged? Maybe the dads of kids, maybe I could look at you and think when you get home from work, are you like spaced out staring at the floor? I've been there, and I'm sure some of you have too, but that's not the way God wants us to live. Are you fully engaged? I won't speak to the moms. I'll have the older women teach them and see if that, because I don't know exactly. I'm usually the one trying to get back engaged. Do you try to guarantee outcomes through perfect performance? Are you a perfectionist? And so you expect a certain outcome based on, this life of chess that we're living. Maybe it's a different lesson, but this is less like chess and more like poker. It's a difference. This is not, I do X, I will get Y. That's not necessarily what happens in life. And can you handle sudden change without living in anxiety? So let's talk about Ecclesiastes 9, verses 1 through 12. We've looked at these passages. If you've been through this whole study of Ecclesiastes, we've looked at them as kind of a spiritual perspective and an earthly perspective. Under the sun, if you see that phrase, by now you're probably familiar to say, okay, if it's under the sun, that means my view here on earth, this is what it seems like. In Ecclesiastes 9:1, it seems like it's a transitionary or a blended perspective. And maybe that's me putting my own spin on this. But he says, I have taken all this to heart, even to examine it all. Talking about chapter 8, how you can't necessarily know all the things that are going to happen. That righteous people, wise people, and their deeds are in the hand of God. People don't know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits them. Their deeds are in the hand of God. I call this a blended passage in the different perspectives of under the sun and a spiritual perspective because it's bittersweet. It has elements of spiritual perspective, but it also has elements of fear since anything awaits him. Anything can happen to this person. Your deeds and their outcomes, they are in the hand of God. That should be comforting. It should be comforting to be in the hand of God. Yet at the same time, no one knows what awaits you in this life. And that's hard. In 2 Samuel chapter 2, 2 Samuel chapter 24, there's a story where David decides to number the people. That was against the law. And so Joab told him, this is a bad idea. You should not do this. And after he did that, he regretted it. And it says in 2 Samuel 24, when David sinned by counting the people, the prophet Gad came to him and gave him 3 choices. He said, he gave him these 3 different choices to run from your enemies. You could have famine and pestilence. And he gave him these 3 choices. And David basically said, I am in great distress. Let us now fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, but do not let me fall into human hands. He didn't even choose. He said, just let God pick what happens to me, because I'd rather be in the hand of God than in the hand of my enemies. I know what my enemies will do to me, but God, his mercies are great. So I think about the different times this phrase is used, in the hand of the Lord. It's actually used 7 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And the fact that our deeds are in the hand of God should be a comforting thing. In Job chapter 13, verse 15, Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Even so, I will defend my own ways before him. So from an earthly perspective, it doesn't always look like there's any benefit to being righteous or wise. Because in verse 2, he says, it's the same for all. So we'll talk about what that in just a minute. The next verses he goes into in Ecclesiastes 9, he says, all things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. And he comes up with this 5 sets. And it seems to be kind of a totality of human moral and religious categories. So the first one is the righteous and the wicked. The righteous is the person who lives in a right relationship with God and other people. He's a righteous man. You can see him. He's like, yeah, that guy is a righteous man. He's good with all the people and so on. The wicked here, it's indicating people who actively oppose God's ways. Those are very diametrically opposed. There's a big chasm between them. One's trying to actively go against God. The other one's actively and outwardly trying to be on God's good side and man's good side. the good, the clean, and the unclean, the Hebrew distinguishes between moral goodness and ritual purity. There's kind of a difference here. A good person and someone who stays ritually pure from a covenant standpoint. This covers both ethical behavior and ceremonial observance. So these are the people who, when they touch a dead body, they go out of the camp and they clean themselves and they wash their hands and so on, all those different things. The internal and external dimensions of religious life. And the third one is those who sacrifice and those who don't. Offering sacrifices was a central part of the covenant worship. That was a big deal in the Old Testament. And this distinction of the people who sacrifice and the people who don't, you might not necessarily know just talking to your neighbor. Did they sacrifice? Did they not sacrifice? I mean, maybe if people talk, you would know. But it's starting to get a little bit more personal. Those who sacrifice and those who don't sacrifice, there's not really a difference from death's perspective. And then the good and the sinner. This pair uses different terms than the first, righteous and wicked. Good and sinner is more, he's specifically referring to one who misses the mark, one who falls short of God's standards. So he may be good he's good with all the people. He seems to obey all the law, but whether we know it or not, he's a sinner, apparently. And then those who swear and those who fear oaths. This one is even more personal, and it's even more hidden. I couldn't tell you whether you fear oaths or whether you don't. And what is this talking about? There's a couple different thoughts on what this could mean, whether this is someone who takes oaths readily. Perhaps he doesn't know whether or not he'll be able to keep the promise. I'm not sure I'll be there tomorrow, so I'm not going to say. I'm not going to make a promise one way or another. And I respect that. Sometimes I get a little too enthusiastic. I think, yeah, we'll be there at 5:30 a.m. And then, you don't really want to pry yourself out of bed at 5:30 a.m. So the one who fears oath-taking is very personal. Notice the progression. It's external. You can definitely see this person from the person. I couldn't tell you whether or not you care, whether or not you promise to do something or not. It progresses from external to internal, fear of oaths. The preacher systematically takes away the idea that any form of human distinction, whether it's behavioral, ceremonial, or disposition, none of that is going to protect you from death. None of that is going to keep you from the democracy that really death has on us. Each pair, if you look at these pairs, you would think that should matter. That the righteous should be protected, right? The ceremonially pure should be blessed. The God-fearing person should be rewarded. But the observation is that death doesn't care. Honestly, it doesn't care. You'll still die someday. And so he goes on to say, this is an evil under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. And from an earthly perspective, it does feel like that's an evil thing. Why should if I live my life, why can't I just live forever if I live good? But he goes on to say, the sons of men are full of evil and madness is in their heart through their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. The madness here is not clinical insanity. He's not talking about you are just living your life in a crazy way. He's not saying that. It's the madness of living as if death isn't real. The madness of making plans as if you have unlimited time. The madness of pursuing things that won't matter in 100 years, as if they're the most important things in the universe. And we all live with this madness to some degree. We know intellectually that we're going to die someday, but we live emotionally as if we're not going to. We act like we're never going to die. We make all kinds of plans for retirement, but no eternity plans. We stress about our reputation and what people think about us, but we don't necessarily think about our soul and what God thinks of us sometimes. We invest in our 401k, but we don't invest in our character. And that's not to say, first of all, that you shouldn't plan for the future. If you ever talk to me, for very long, I hugely encourage, especially the young people, to invest in 401k and a Roth IRA and so on. It's not having a plan that's a problem. It's having a more detailed 30-year financial plan than your plan for the next 30 million years. If you stack up your time on this earth compared to eternity, it's madness to put that much effort into a retirement you may not enjoy. And it's a tension because you do have to put some. But if that's all you think about, it's madness. The preacher says there's a fundamental disconnect in the human heart. We know the truth about mortality. We know this, but we live in denial of it. We don't act like it. We don't act like we're going to die. That's madness. It's the crazy way we organize our priorities around temporary things and we ignore eternal things. We live as if the very things, the only thing that's certain. They say death and taxes. Actually, I know some people who can get around taxes. You talk to the right people. I haven't figured out myself. You are not going to get around death. It's the one thing that's most certain, but we act like it doesn't apply to us. Verse 4 opens with this, it's sort of a melancholy optimism, I guess. I don't know if you want to take it that way. He says, hey, at least you're alive. He says, a living dog is better than a dead lion. And I looked at that so many times. Is this an earthly perspective? Is this spiritual perspective? And I can see both sides of the potential here. He says, as long as you're breathing, you've got something going for you. There's potential of possibility. And I've lost my cursor. I can't tell where I am. Verse 5 tells us what the advantage is to living. He says, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. And I think that's important to remember for ourselves, because I don't know about you, but it seems like it's a human desire for us to want to be remembered. We want to make an impact. And we talk about Ecclesiastes and we use that phraseology all the time. How do I make an impact? Because why do we want to make an impact? And we've talked about this, just the guys, when we were talking about this chapter, or not this chapter, but this book. What does any other creature in the world, does a 12-point buck want to make an impact on the world? I don't know what that goes through their mind. What do we want to make an impact? Why is it that we want to do this? And we look at Ecclesiastes as, how do I get meaning from my life? And that seems to be the preacher's struggle. Maybe all of us have that at some point if you live long enough and think deeply enough. How do I leave a legacy? It's just going to be gone. And verse 6 says, he's talking about the dead, also their love, their hatred, and their envy. And that word envy is interesting because it actually, in Phineas, I think, I have it written somewhere here, Numbers 25, Phineas, when he goes in and he kills the people who had turned their back on the God, it uses the same word here as envy. It's zeal in some places. And so I almost think it's better translated that way. Their love, their hatred, their zeal have now perished. It's gone. Whatever you love so much, whatever you hate, you get so angry about this political party or that political party. Guess what? When you die, that was yours and it's gone. All of those strong emotions that you felt are gone. What good are they? So the progression here, as he goes through these verses, he says, the living know they'll die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward. All their love, all their zeal is gone. Death strips away literally everything that makes existence in this life meaningful. All of that's going to be gone. It's like he's saying, yes, celebrate being alive, but exactly know what you're celebrating against. Because the hope of verse 4 is it's not naive. It's telling us that we should have gratitude. A living dog is better than a dead lion. And he goes on to, in verse 7, I don't want that to be depressing. I want to get back to that in just a second. Verse 7 goes on to tell us to eat our bread with happiness, drink our wine and cheerful. And if you just look at it from that perspective, thinking, oh man, I'm going to die, so I got to hurry up and live my life and enjoy it, that's not quite what he's saying here. He goes on and he talks about how God has already approved your works. And I think that is a pivotal and critical phrase that we need to think about. God has already approved your works. Look at the flow. In verse 1, he says, the righteous and the wise are in the hand of God. And then in verse 7 through 9, he commands us to eat with joy, drink with a merry heart, enjoy the life with your spouse, because God has already approved what you do. There are things that God has already approved of. He put these in place for us to enjoy. So do them and enjoy them to the fullest extent. It's as if this whole section is saying, you can't figure out God's ways enough to control the outcomes, but here's what you can do. You can delight in his creation, and that delight actually pleases God. And that's the thing I want to think about. It's not meant to incite us to anxious self-preservation, think, oh, I'm going to live the fullest life I can so that I can get as much out of it for me. It's to shift back to grateful reverence. My joy in God's gifts is in itself a gift back to God. Think about it this way. Why do we as parents give our childs gifts? Why do we give them presents? Is it because the parent needs something back? Oh, I need this child to love me, so I'm going to give them a present. Come on. I don't know how old your kids are that you need them to love you back that much. Mine are all over me personally, so I'm like, whoa. But we give our gifts for a different reason. The child's joy. We love to make them happy. We give that gift to them because we want to see that smile. We want them to be happy. We tend to think human parenting, or at least in my life, I've thought in the past, human parenting is like God's love. That's a nice analogy, isn't it? I look at my parenting life and I'm like, God is my parent, in a certain degree. But actually, I think I've got it flipped wrong. I think God designed human parenting specifically to help us understand how he relates to us. Parenthood isn't just a good comparison. It's like a tutorial almost. Why do parents have kids? Let me just go down this rabbit hole for just a second. Why do we have kids? Now, there's lots of different types of parents I know, but a parent doesn't think I'm lacking something, so I'll create a little person to fill that emotional void. Healthy, mature couples who have children, they want to love and nurture and provide for and delight in another being. The parent's greatest joy isn't from getting something out of that kid, but it's like watching that child experience joy, experience wonder for the first time. When I shove a strawberry in Elijah's mouth and his eyes it's just, you really get a kick out of that for some reason. Do you think God created us because he was lonely? Do you think God created us because he needed something? There's so many verses that tell us God is love, and love tends to, it seems that love creates other things. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14 through 15, the writer tells us, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. All parenthood gets its pattern from God, not the other way around. We don't understand God through God. The Bible actually tells us every family in heaven and on earth derives its name from the Father. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 9 says, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? Earthly fatherhood is the lesser version, pointing to the greater. So I think God created us because he wanted us, he wanted beings who could experience his creation, taste his goodness, feel his love. And his joy comes from our gifts and our joy in his gifts. So when you taste that strawberry, when you see that sunrise and laugh till your sides hurt, you're not just having a nice moment. You're participating in the things that, the very reasons God made you. It's a completion of the circuit that brings God joy. When I look at it through this perspective, I think it changes the living dog, dead, I'm messing it up. A living dog is better than a dead lion. It's not because you can still enjoy life, but you still have a capacity for gratitude and wonder, not just for your own sake, but the dead can't taste bread. They can't marvel at good coffee. They can't laugh with their wife. They can't give God the gift of that creaturely joy anymore. They can't do the things that they can't make me happy when I see my sons. That no longer happens. It's like these verses are saying, I know you can't understand my ways, human, but you can still enjoy my world. And when you do, that brings me joy too. So as long as you're alive, do that. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24, there are several verses that support this. 2:24 through 25 says, there's nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Ecclesiastes 3, verse 13 says, moreover, it is God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their toil. And then Other verses like Zephaniah 3:17, the Bible says, "The Lord your God is with you. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing." This isn't just enjoy life while you can. It's God wants you to delight in his gifts because your delight delights him. The phrase "God has already approved" suggests he's not just permitting your joy, he's allowing you. That's not necessarily it. He's anticipating it. He's planning for it. He's delighting in it before it even happens. So maybe it's a subtle nuance, and maybe I'm fooling myself. I don't know exactly in thinking that makes sense. I hope that makes sense to you all. We can talk about it more later, I guess. But we actually go into another illustration that I think might also help. He goes on in verses 7 through 10, to eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. And verse 8, when he says, let your garments always be white, let not oil be lacking on your head. White clothes and oil were signs of celebration and festivity. You know, you put your white clothes on not just to go work in the field because you're going to get them dirty. You would put oil on your head to make your face bright, and you would put your white clothes on to celebrate, to be festival. It's like being dressed for a party. This is God's party. God's created a place for us to enjoy. He wants us to celebrate the lives he's given us. That doesn't mean we're never sad. Obviously, Ecclesiastes talks about that a lot. There are times when, there's a time for mourning and a time for sorrow. But if that's all you have, then you're forgetting some of the other things that God has to offer us. He goes on to talk about live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your short life that he's given you under the sun. And I want to talk about this just for a moment because I do think this is a really, it has a lot in here. He says live joyfully. I think that's the New American Standard translation. It's my favorite. The others say enjoy the life, and it's not as punchy. But sometimes there's easy ways to to live joyfully with your spouse, and other times there's not. In geometry, there's something called amplitude. And I'm really glad Holly's not here to correct me on this. But amplitude is as high as a sine wave goes, is as low as it can go. And you can shift it up and down. But my brother and I would talk about amplitude of people's personalities. Like that guy gets super happy and then he's really sad. And you can stretch that out. And someone else is just, because he and I would compare ourselves, because I get really happy and then I'm really sad. And he was just like, I am okay, always. And I'm like, that guy, so lucky. And sometimes I think you can double that, if I don't mean to get into electrical, but you can make that amplitude even higher or even lower with marriage, because now you have two people. So different people have these different things. But here's what I want you to understand about marriage. And this is not me saying I've got it figured out, because I sure don't. But he says live joyfully. That's an active choice. Joy isn't something that happens to you in marriage. It's something you have to create daily. Choose delight over complaint. Choose to notice what's good rather than fixating on what's lacking. And you can do that with any relationship. Live joyfully. We used to at a company I worked with, we would have we called it the Brickyard. It was a town hall. Everybody in the company would get together and the CEO would say, guys, we could talk about all the things that are going wrong. I actually don't want to hear that right now. We talk about that all day long, every day, if you didn't know that. In this meeting, we're going to talk about what's going right. Everybody, I want you to shout out somebody who's doing something awesome, and that's what we would do. Every Friday afternoon, we'd just spend an hour talking about all the awesome things that are going on. We'd leave. He wanted us to go into the weekend pumped to come back on Monday, so it was pretty self-serving, but it seemed to work. Notice the things that are good rather than fixating what's on lacking. He says, with the wife you love. I think that's a tricky thing. He's just like, wait a second. He's tricking me. He says, this is the wife you love. Do you know that? You married her. You love her. But you're fighting. What's going on here? Live joyfully with the wife that you love. And he's reminding us here, this is a present focus. Love her as she is today, not who you wish she'd become. And the Hebrew here suggests ongoing active love, not just feeling it, but doing it. Do this. And he says all the days. And so I think this is suggesting consistency over intensity. Grand romantic gestures are nice. Taking somebody to New York City to a Michelin star restaurant. I actually have a friend who works in those places, and they say, I can get you in wherever you want. I'm like, cool. I don't have the money to do that right now. But it's probably better. Can you imagine if I said, okay, I'm going to do that next year, and I'm just going to treat her like dirt until then, and then it'll be fine. Or maybe it'd be better to just be nice a little bit every day, all the days of your life. And then he says, for this is your portion in life. In this verse, it says, this is your reward in life. He's not speaking sarcastically, saying, this is all you got, so you better enjoy it. That's not what he's saying. He says this marriage with its particular joys and challenges is your assigned portion. Don't compare it to others. Find richness in what you've been given. And I'll throw this out because if there's anyone who doesn't know this already, maybe you aren't married, maybe you haven't been married, I don't know. But guess what? Marriage is not like as easy as it seems like it might seem to should be. I don't know. There's this cycle of harmony, disharmony, and repair. And, whether it's easily felt or deeply felt, that harmony, just like parenthood, I don't think it's just a nice analogy that God noticed to explain the church. We'll look at Ephesians 5 and 25 in a minute. Marriage was designed to help us understand the relationship between Christ and the church. So we all want to stay here in harmony. And we think there's something wrong when we get out of harmony. But guess what? There's not anything wrong. It just happens to be that you're human. You're going to get into disharmony. If you've ever sang long enough with someone, eventually they're going to hit a bad note. And you'll hear that. And then that's disharmony. The people with good relationships are the ones who learn the tools to repair and return to harmony. And the good relationships are the ones who get through it fast. So, we're in disharmony. Okay, I recognize this. I need to use the tools that I've been given to get back to harmony. It's just a cycle. And you can apply this to any relationship in life. The relationships with your kids, the relationships with your parents. One person said, common sense just isn't that common anymore. Well, common sense requires a common background. So no, it's not necessarily common anymore. But the key is mastering repair, not avoiding disharmony, which is what we want to do. I just don't ever want to get into disharmony. You are going to. You just have to learn the tools to repair, to get back to harmony. And then he ends with this part. He says, this is the gift that he has given you. Marital joy isn't just your business. It's something God has given you specifically. I did want to read Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. It's so confusing. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to Ephesians 5 and learn about marriage. It's like, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And I think it's this, again, thinking backwards, the way we think about marriage and other things. Instead of thinking, oh, wow, God noticed that this is marriage. And he says, hey, guys, that's actually like Christ and the church. It's backwards. He had Christ and the church in mind, and he designed marriage for us to understand how Christ and the church should work. We don't look at Christ and the church as an old married couple where he's like, come on, let's go. That's not what Christ and the church do. This is more illustrative of a young couple where the young man, he's just so pumped to be around his bride that he picks her up and throws her over his arm, and she's laughing. That's the picture that Christ and the church should be. And there's probably going to be harmony, disharmony, and repair as we work through trying to get closer to Christ as his church. All right, I'm getting way off topic, so let's go back to verse 10. After he talks about all these things, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no activity, no planning, no knowledge, or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. And I think this is the real how. How do I live life knowing that I can't control life and death is unavoidable? I know I'm going to die and I can't control my life. How do I enjoy it? You do everything that you do with all your might. Sometimes we feel like we interpret this as work hard because death ends everything, or seize the day because you're going to die. But when we look at death as inevitable, and we dwell on death, for me, it's hard to think take it seriously. It's hard to do the things that I need to do. I'm like, well, does it actually matter? That's not the point. That's not, I'm trying to make an impact. So will this make an impact or will that make an impact? Just think about it from a parent's perspective. And maybe if you could take one thing away from this, think about it from this perspective. It's not about you. It's not. We are looking for meaning in life, but it's not about you. It's about God. think about it from a parent perspective. A parent doesn't just want their child to exist passively. When you see your kid just laying on the couch and just, I'm bored, well, you just want to kick him out the window. Well, we'll go and get not bored. How do you think God feels about us when he's given us this world and we're like, man, I wish I had a whatever, there's a sunrise this morning. If you just get out of bed a little earlier, there's a sunset, get on the roof, go look at the stars. There's a lot out there that God has put there. There's more than just that truck. There's a lot of things out there. We want to see our kids throw themselves into life, use their gifts, explore their potential, engage fully with the world that the parent has provided. When your kids build a sandcastle with total focus and they're like, oh no, now we got to put a turret here and then we're going to do a thing here. We're going to do a thing all the way to the ocean, so we'll pull water around it and all this. And we're like, wow, where did they get their architecture degree? And they keep working on it. That's awesome. As a parent, I just love seeing that. Is it because, oh good, they're being productive? Is that what it is? Oh, they're building something worth having. Do you think that's what God's looking at you and thinking? Like, oh good, he's finally gotten that promotion. I was hoping he'd work a little harder. Is that what God thinks about? Is that what you really think? He's not saying do it with all your might so that you can get a raise or whatever. He's saying wholehearted engagement brings God joy. He gave you hands, he gave you a mind, he gave you abilities and opportunities, and he loves it when you use them fully, when you don't throttle back and live half-heartedly. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. Listen to what he says. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. With all your might. That's the same word he uses here. When whatever your hands find to do it with all your might. He says, love the Lord your God with all your might. That's the same word that he's using here. He doesn't want us living half-heartedly, not for outcomes. That's what we as humans want, but that's the wrong way to look at it. One of the most random stories in the Old Testament, this is one of my favorite, and I am going to have to cut this off at halfway, I think. Wow, guys, I am so sorry. I'll read this and we'll figure out a stopping point, but I'm literally only halfway through. I'm so sorry. This is one of my favorite but random verses. Elisha had been suffering from an illness, from the illness which he would die. Joash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. My father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, go get your bow and some arrows. And he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. When he'd taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. He puts his hands, if I was drawing a bow back, I'd be like, well, get off of me. But no, he puts his hands on his hands, like, all right, let it go. He shoots out the window. And he says, open the east window, he says. And he opens. Shoot, Elisha says. He shoots. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram, meaning he was going to win the battle. Don't worry, king, you're going to win the battle. Elisha declares, you will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, take the arrows. And the king took them. Elisha told him, strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him. What? He just said strike the ground, and he did. So he struck it 3 times and stopped. He's angry with him, says, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will only defeat it 3 times. Elisha died and was buried. What's the point here? What is he talking about? Elisha is literally on his deathbed, and he gets angry because the king didn't strike the ground with enough intensity. The king did what was asked of him, but he held back. He didn't give it everything. He didn't just some people, you tell them to do something, you're like, oh, whoa, you're going to hurt yourself. And that's what he wanted the king apparently to do. For some reason, full engagement, leaving it all on the field, is something that God holds in high regard. We as humans, we respect that too. When we see a player just giving it everything he's got, and man, his heart's going to explode if he keeps it up. But wow, we get a kick out of that for some reason. And maybe that's built into us. Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 through 16, I think is another illustration of how God cares about this. He says, I know your works. You are neither hot nor cold. I would that you were either cold or hot. So because you're lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. God would have rather than been cold and against him than to just be lackadaisical. He's not saying, here in Ecclesiastes, back in verse 10, he's not saying, make the most of this gift, hurry up before it's too late. But he's saying, make the most of this gift of conscious, active life while you have it, because this capacity to engage fully is in itself a gift that brings God pleasure. It's the difference between anxious scrambling for status, which is what we do a lot of times, versus joyful participation. This is the life God has given me, so I'm going to give it everything I've got because God's given this to me. We'll try to run through kind of here. Race is not to the swift, the battle's not to the strong, neither is the bread to the wise. You know, the race usually is to the swift. The fastest guy usually does win. And if you're the fastest guy, guess what? You might not. That's not going to save you from death. The battle is usually to the strongest, but sometimes, actually, it turns out you put Chance and Justin together. Justin might be able to beat Chance, even though I don't mean to sorry, Chance. He's very strong, and but the smaller guy can sometimes win. It happens. The bread usually goes to the wise, wealth usually goes to the smartest people, but not always. Every now and then we're surprised, and it happens often enough that we shouldn't be surprised. If you think you're strong, if you think you're fast, if you think you're discerning, if you think you're smart, even you are going to die. No one's going to escape death. So, live. I won't read this one. We'll get back to that someday. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11 through 12. If we knew God's timing, if we knew we were going to win because we're the fastest, we'd live by sight, not faith. The uncertainty kind of makes us dependent on him. Not uncertainty from an intellectual standpoint that he is, but in our life. Am I going to get rich? Am I going to do this, that, or the other? We have to have faith in God that he's going to take care of us. It prevents us from manipulating him. If we could predict God's patterns, we'd probably try to game the system. When we can't earn or predict outcomes, everything is a gift. It's not just we're not earning these different things. And it helps us create presence. When you can't control the future, you have to be in the present right now if you really want to enjoy life. Today is your life. So I'll just apply this to different types of people. So I've got a passive person, a joyless person, a few others. If you're a passive person, God's sovereignty doesn't eliminate your responsibility. You need to put an effort even when outcomes are uncertain. And the goal is to engage wholeheartedly. And whatever work is before you, whatever you have to do, do it with all your might. If you don't have any joy in your life, spiritual maturity doesn't require being sad all the time. That's not being spiritually mature. God says, live joyfully with the wife of your youth and eat bread with gladness. He commands us to and approves of the joy in his gifts. We should celebrate these ordinary pleasures. If you're anxious and you're always worried about things, you can't control life. You just have to let it go. You are in the hands of a sovereign God. You should prepare wisely, but it's kind of like that Eisenhower quote, planning is everything. Plans are nothing. That's kind of the story of my life. It's true. And the bitter person, life's unfairness doesn't negate God's goodness. God is good. He is good. When you stop expecting life to be fair, you can start receiving it as a gift. So if I were to give some takeaways, it's to both trust God's sovereignty and take responsibility for your choices. Work diligently and accept outcomes. Plan wisely and hold those plans loosely. Enjoy the present gifts, but live life with an eternal perspective because you will die. But how can we live life we can't control, knowing death we can't avoid? These are the kind of the things that I would suggest. Love deeply, knowing relationships are temporary. Work as if everything depends on you. Trust as if everything depends on God. Plan for the future while doing what you can. Be fully present today. Enjoy temporal pleasures while longing for eternal joy. Accept life's unfairness while affirming God's perfect justice. That was kind of the overview. I want to get to, if I could wish one thing for those of you listening, it's that you would number your days. We should be dangerously joyful. We should be losing ourselves completely in our work and our study and our life. But most of all, we should fear less. I don't think we could be fearless, and especially not in the face of death, I suppose, but at least we should fear less in life. I want to give a quick story of this person named Jim Elliot. In the 1950s, this young man named Jim Elliot gave up his comfort, his safety, and his promising life in the United States to take the gospel to a dangerous tribe in the Ecuadorian jungle, the Wadani people. Most people had never heard of them. They'd never been contacted. Those who had were afraid of them because they were incredibly violent. No one who tried to contact them would come back alive. They would kill them. But Jim didn't care about that. He felt like they needed the gospel. And so he believed their souls mattered more than his life. So he trained for years. He learned the language. He prayed for them. He prepared his heart. And on January 8th of 1956, he and 4 other people touched down an airplane, made contact, and it looked promising. But then things turned, and all 5 of those missionaries were killed. They were speared to death on that riverbank. Jim was 28 years old, and the world kind of thought it was a waste. But Jim's wife didn't run away from that. In fact, she moved into the tribe later on. She forgave the men who killed her husband, and she taught them about Jesus. And the very man who killed Jim later baptized Jim's son. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? The man who killed Jim baptized his son. And in his journal he wrote, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Jim knew he couldn't keep his life. And the thing is, you can't keep yours either. If you think you can keep your life, you're wrong. But you can give it to something eternal. In Ecclesiastes says, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, because the grave is coming fast." And in the grave, there's no work, no thought, no knowledge, no wisdom. And the world we think is so concrete. This world that we care so much about is just misty compared to the world that's coming and what lies before us in heaven. I mentioned how to cheat death, so I'll just mention at the end last year. Romans chapter 6, verse 3 through 4. "Do you not know that all of us who've been baptized into Christ Jesus have been baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life." This to me is the thing that makes me less somber about death when I consider in 1 Corinthians 15:54, "This perishable will put on the imperishable. This mortal will put on immortality. Then will come about the saying that is written, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of the sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So if there's someone here who has been avoiding thinking about death, and you don't want to think about it because you don't know whether or not you're going to live forever, if you're willing to be baptized into Christ's death, then you have the opportunity to live forever. You can't control this life. You can't avoid death, but you can live forever with Christ. So we invite you to come while we stand, while we sing.
If you want to see more sermons like the one you just watched, then click on the subscribe button below and you'll be alerted when a new video is uploaded. Also, check out our website at chapelgrovechurch.com. At the top of the page, you'll find a resources button where you can take a free online Bible study series. One series is Are You Saved? It's a completely video series conducted by myself, Aaron Batty. The other one is written. It's called the Truth Free series. Upon completion of either one, you'll get a copy of a free book in the mail, Muscle and a Shovel. Thanks for watching our channel. We'll see you next time.